الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
قائم على محمد الوصية الفضيلة الدرجة الرابعة سيد مقام محمد الذي وعدته وإنك لا تخلف الميعاد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له. ونشهد أن سيدنا حبيبنا محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله بالحق بشيرا ونذيرا وداعيا إلى الله بإذنه وسراجا منيرا. أما بعد، قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم: من رأى منكم منكرا فليغير بيده فإن لم يستطع فبلسانه فإن لم يستطع فبقلبه وذلك أضعف الإيمان. Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, whoever sees an evil, let him change it with his hand. And if he is not able to do so, then let him change it with his tongue. And if he is not able to do so, then let him do it with his heart. And that is the weakest of faith. Rasulullah has given 3 gradations for our faith. The first form is that when you see something wrong, you should actively pursue to change that wrong. In other words, change it with your hand. If you are unable to do so, then you should speak up against it with your tongue. And if you can't do that, then you should hate it with your hearts. You should dislike it with your hearts. That is the weakest form of your faith. وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ, the weakest type of iman. Word of caution to those of you who are listening to me today. It's not going to be an easy listen. So if you don't want to get upset with me, I'm giving you a disclaimer first. I don't do this because I enjoy upsetting anybody. I do this because I'm fulfilling the second type of iman our beloved Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is described in this hadith, and that is to speak up against something that is wrong. I can't change it with my hand, but I can speak up against it. I don't want to be at the lowest stage of iman, just disliking it in my heart. I just don't want to be there. I want to be one stage higher. If I could, I'd go and change it with my own hand. What am I talking about? I'm talking about Palestine, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. Only a few days ago, a journalist by the name of Shireen Abu Akleh, who was covering the ongoing Israeli military operation in Jenin, was shot dead by a bullet that was targeted by a sniper, with a precision sniper. She was wearing a helmet, she was wearing a bulletproof vest on which it said press, and the sniper shot her in her ear, below her earlobe. This is not an accident. This is not a stray bullet that has come out of somebody's gun. We call it precision shooting. Somebody from somewhere targeted Shireen Abu Akleh because of her work and took a shot, precisely knowing how she could be killed. And she was killed. May Allah have mercy on her soul. Some of you may be saying she's a non-Muslim. At least she is there at the forefront in Jenin, and you and I are not. You can say what you like. There is a woman laid down her life for the freedom of the Palestinian people. What are you doing about their freedom? Except a mealy-mouth words of criticism. Brother, she was a non-Muslim, don't pray for her. How dare you speak like that? She laid down her life for the freedom of the Palestinians. Have some respect for her. Israeli government immediately said, it was the Palestinians who shot her. Huh? Why would Palestinians shoot Shireen Abu Akleh, who has been a champion for the Palestinian cause for the last God knows how many years? Broadcaster, journalist, reporter in Al Jazeera and many other frontline media organizations. Secondly, if Palestinians had such rifles to take precision shot at assassinating people, do you think the imbalance in the land would be the reality that we see today? My brothers and sisters, how could I stay silent when such evil happens on the lives of Palestinians on a daily basis? You know, the Palestinians who have lived in such miserable state for the last, I don't know how many years, 70 plus years? 70 plus years. And today, we have our cowardly politicians. We call them yellow journalists. Very fashionably silent when Israel perpetrates a heinous crime against the Palestinians, who are constantly humiliated, dehumanized. But our fashionable politicians and journalists are shamelessly silent. Where is their humanity and their conscience, my brothers and sisters? We haven't lost our humanity and our conscience. We haven't. We are Muslims. We don't. We can't. If we lose our humanity and conscience, we no longer become and remain a Muslim. We're Muslims. Rasulullah said, if you see an evil, go and change that evil with your own hand. And if you can't change that with your own hand, speak up against it. And therefore we shall speak up against it. Who is going to stop me from speaking up against the Israeli occupation and aggression against the Palestinian people? Who? Who's going to stop me? It was in this mimbar, in this very pulpit, I gave a khutbah many years ago about Palestine. Some Muslims called up the management, telling them to sack me. Believe me, some Muslims called up the management and told them to sack me. And the management said, we don't sack our imams like that. Just because you said so, you can't dictate our agenda. Alhamdulillah, they made their own decision in the right way they thought. Brothers and sisters, injustice, wherever is happening, is injustice, and we must speak up against it. The question is, when the Israeli government perpetrates heinous crime, brutal crime against the Palestinians, why do we see our politicians and our journalists remain silent? Why do we see very few mosques in our country, very few Muslim rulers around the world speak up against Israeli aggression? Why? Why? You know, Ukrainians have been suffering. We all have been speaking up against Russians. I have been. I've been speaking against Russians ever since I was a child when they invaded Afghanistan. I've never trusted Russian regime, never trusted communism ever, never will, because that is one of the biggest, the most disgraceful scar on human history. Anything that comes out of communist mind is a problem, as far as I'm concerned. I'm speaking up against the Russian occupation and aggression on the Ukrainian land. Why are the world leaders silent against the Israeli aggression and occupation in the same way as Russians are doing against the Ukrainians? What's the difference? Tell me, what's the difference? Illegal occupation, illegal invasion, subjugation of people, shooting dead of innocent people, bombing of residential places, etc. What's the difference? Palestinians have suffered all forms of injustices and violation of their human rights on a daily basis, from their lands, buildings being taken away from them, expansion of illegal settlements, confiscation of Palestinian homes and properties, Israel regularly using its court to rubber stamp the theft of Palestinian properties, demolition of their homes, burning of Palestinian land, farmland, and children, women and man, targeted assassination of Palestinian politicians, journalists and activists, dehumanization of Palestinian people and their supporters. In fact, regularly attacking anybody who stands up for Palestine, including Gary Lineker, the former England champion goalkeeper. He wrote a tweet, and you should have seen the attack on his personality and how from the woodworks all the Israel apologists had come out and started attacking him, trying to discredit him for saying the truth. Once and for all, tell the truth. Don't be afraid. Muslims are prevented from standing for offices because they have spoken up against Israel. In the last election, local election that took place, I know many Muslim councillors who applied to become local councillors. They were deselected while they were a sitting councillor because the excuse was, you have shared tweets and Facebook posts that support Palestinians, and it is biased. Biased. My brothers and sisters, when there is an evil, مَنْ رَأَى مِنْكُمْ مُنْكَرًا فَيُغَيِّرُ بِيَدِهِ. If you see an evil, change it with your own hand. If you can't change it with your own hand, speak against it. And if you can't speak against it, hate it with your heart. That's the least you can do. Don't let anybody silence you. You know, brothers and sisters, Israel is known and has been termed by Amnesty International recently as an apartheid state. Nelson Mandela called it an apartheid state. Desmond Tutu called it an apartheid state. Many people of the world today and yesterday's leaders have called it an apartheid state. And yet, Britain and America is a blinker to the reality. They like to behave like ostriches, burying their heads in the sand. No, they're not apartheid state. What do you mean they're not an apartheid? It is not an apartheid state. What else is an apartheid state? One law for the Palestinians, one law for the Israelis. One legal system for the Israelis, one legal system for the Palestinians. One road for the Israelis, one road for the Palestinians. One settlement for the Israelis. A homeless shelter maybe, a refugee camp for the Palestinians. Israelis are allowed to roam freely across Israel. Palestinians are not. They're given different types of car registration plate number, ID card, so that they can be identified, stopped and searched and harassed on a regular basis. If that is not an apartheid state, what is? What is an apartheid state? Don't be afraid of the Israeli lobby groups, media organizations, politicians and apologists, and the disgraceful mudslingers who would be calling you names and attempting to discredit you. Don't worry, I get discredited every day by these idiots. Only the other day, an Israeli apologist wrote an article about me, a long one, What's my crime? I've criticized Israel. That's my crime. Well, go ahead. Publish 20 other articles if you like. The truth must be spoken, and we should never be afraid of it. What do the Palestinians need, brothers and sisters? What do they need? They need basic freedom like you and I enjoy. In Britain, I'm brown. Do white English people have different legal system for browns and whites? Do they have different legal system for the Muslims and the non-Muslims? No, they can't. If they did, the entire country would be in uproar. That would be illegal in this country. It would be taken to courts and challenged. And yet Israel can get away with it. Why? I just don't get it. I don't understand this, brothers and sisters. Please help me to understand it. What is it about Israel? It can get away with everything, but nobody else can. Palestinians need freedom like you and I have. They need protection of their lives, their properties, their intellect, their families, their religion, their properties. They just need freedom like everyone else enjoys in Europe, in America, in Australia, in all those countries who support Israel blindly without even questioning it, without ever taking it into an account for its barbarity and brutality against the Palestinians. Israel does all this because there is a support, because it can get away with it, because America would veto any action in the United Nations if the world was to come together and try and bring together an action. It would veto. America would veto, so Israel does what it wants. What about the Palestinians? Do the Palestinians not have a right to exist? My brothers and sisters, somebody wrote an astounding piece of truth. He wrote, I'm Israel. I came to a land without a people for a people without a land. Those people who happened to be here had no right to be here. And my people showed them they had to leave or die, razing 400 Palestinian villages to the ground, erasing their history. I'm Israel. Some of my people committed massacres and later became prime ministers to represent me. In 1948, Menachem Begin was in charge of the unit that slaughtered the inhabitants of Deir Yassin, including 100 women and children. In 1953, Ariel Sharon led the slaughter of the inhabitants of Qibya, and in 1982 arranged for the Allies to butcher around 2,000 refugees in a camp called Sabra and Satila. I'm Israel, carved up in 1948 out of 78% of the land of Palestine, dispossessing its inhabitants and replacing them with Jewish people from Europe and other parts of the world. While the natives whose families lived on this land for thousands of years are not allowed to return, Jewish people from all over the world are welcome to its instant citizenship. I'm Israel. In 1967, I swallowed the remaining land of Palestine, East Jerusalem, the West Bank and Gaza, and placed their inhabitants under an oppressive military rule, controlling and humiliating every aspect of their daily life. Eventually, they should get the message that they are not welcome to stay and join the millions of Palestinian refugees in the shanty camps of Lebanon and Jordan. I'm Israel. I have the power to control American policy. My American Israel Public Affairs Committee can make or break any politician of its choosing. As you see, they all compete to please me. All the forces of the world are powerless against me, including the UN, as I have America to veto, to block any condemnations of my war crimes. As Sharon so eloquently phrased in his own words, we control America. I'm Israel. I influence American mainstream media too, and you will always find the news tailored to my favor. I have invested millions of dollars into PR representations, and CNN, New York Times, and others have been doing an excellent job of promoting my propaganda. Look at the other international news sources and you will see the difference. I'm Israel. You Palestinians want to negotiate peace, but you are not as smart as me. I will negotiate, but will only let you have your municipalities while I control your borders, your water, your airspace, and anything else of importance. While we negotiate, I will swallow your hilltops and fill them with settlements populated by most extremist of my extremists, armed to the teeth. These settlements will be connected with roads you cannot use, and you will be imprisoned if imprisoned in your little Bantustan, between them surrounded by checkpoints in every direction. I'm Israel. I have the fourth strongest army in the world, possessing nuclear weapons. How dare your children confront my oppression with stones? Don't you know my soldiers won't hesitate to blow their heads off? In 17 months, I've killed 900 of your children, 900 of you, and injured 17,000, mostly civilians, and have the mandate to continue since the international community remains silent. Ignore, as I do, the hundreds of Israeli reserve officers who are now refusing to carry out my control over the lands and people. Their voices of conscience will not protect you. I'm Israel. You want freedom? I have bullets, tanks, missiles, Apaches, and F-16s to obliterate you. I have hounds under siege, confiscated your lands, uprooted your trees, demolished your homes, and you still demand freedom? Don't you get the message? You will never have peace or freedom because I'm Israel. Written by Professor Norman Finkelstein. Many people discredit him for his position, but what he wrote here is the truth. I can't be zipped. You can't be controlled from knowing the truth and speaking the truth. What are we calling for as Muslims in this congregation? Freedom for the Palestinians. Is that a crime? Brothers and sisters, is that a crime? No. Calling for freedom of all people of the world is not a crime. Why is it a crime to call for freedom for the Palestinians? End occupation today. Let the Palestinians be free. It's the only call we have from our pulpits. End occupation today. Let the Palestinians be free. That's the only call we have. We are not saying anything against anybody else. Let the Palestinians be free. Because that's what Rasulullah said. If you see an evil, speak up against it. If you don't speak up against it, and you remain silent, then you are occupying the lowest of positions in your iman. May Allah forgive us and protect us. May Allah free Palestine from occupation. May Allah free the Palestinian people. And may Allah restore peace and stability in this earth, in every part of the world. Wa akhir da'wana and alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Wal aqibatu lil muttaqeen. Was salatu was salamu ala Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. My brothers and sisters, let me make it again very clear. As Muslims, we stand for justice for all people. That's what Allah says. I'dilu huwa aqrabu lit-taqwa. Be just. That is the closest you can be to Allah consciousness. Does anybody dislike justice? Does anybody dislike justice? No. We are calling for justice for all people. We're calling for justice for the Ukrainians. We're calling for justice for the Kashmiris. We're calling for justice for the Yemenis. We're calling for justice for the Afghanis. We're calling justice for anybody who is under occupation or oppression. We're calling for justice for the Syrians. Why are we not calling for justice for the Palestinians? Why not? Please tell me one logical reason why Palestinians don't deserve justice. Somebody, somewhere, please tell me. Convince me that the Palestinians do not deserve justice at all. You can't. You cannot convince me, because there is no truth to saying Palestinians don't deserve justice. There is no truth to it, and you know it already. So brothers and sisters, as good Muslims, as conscious Muslims, as true servants of Allah, who bow down to fairness and justice all the time, fearing Allah and the punishment that awaits us in the Day of Judgment, we stand for fairness and justice for all people, regardless of who you are, where you come from. Remember this message. Justice for all people. Palestinians deserve justice and freedom. Ya Arhamur Rahimin, Ya Akramul Akramin. Free Al-Aqsa, Ya Allah. Free Al-Aqsa, Ya Allah. Free Al-Aqsa, Ya Allah. Ya Arhamur Rahimin, give my brothers and sisters in Palestine freedom, Ya Allah. Ya Arhamur Rahimin, all we ask for is justice for Palestinians, Ya Allah. All we ask for is justice for Palestinians, Ya Allah. Give them justice, Ya Allah. Restore justice, Ya Allah. Ya Arhamur Rahimin, we ask for justice in all parts of the world, Ya Allah. We ask for freedom for Kashmiris, Ya Allah. We ask for freedom for our brothers and sisters in Yemen, Ya Allah. We ask for freedom for our brothers and sisters in Syria, Ya Allah. We ask for our brothers and sisters freedom in every part of the world, Ya Allah. We ask for freedom and fairness and justice for all human beings in all parts of the world, Ya Allah. Ya Arhamur Rahimin, Ya Akramul Akramin. Forgive us, Ya Allah. Forgive us, Ya Allah. Forgive us, Ya Allah. We have the lowest of Iman, Ya Allah. Enable us so that we can better our Iman, Ya Allah. Ya Arhamur Rahimin, so that we can speak against evil, Ya Allah. And change evil around us, Ya Allah. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون فاذكروني أذكركم واشكروا لي ولا تكفرون والله